So this video will apply to you if you are a Scorpio sun, moon, rising, if you have a lot of planets in the 8th house, if you have a lot of interactions with Pluto and other personal planets in your chart. So I'm back with another educational video. Today we're going to be talking about Scorpios. Shockingly, yes, I know. We're going to be talking about why it is that Scorpios have that hidden occult knowledge that they seem to have. You know how Scorpios just sort of know who's a creep or who is a bad person. Other people might think that they're just paranoid. Well, today, in today's video, we're gonna be talking all about why it is that they actually do have some pretty spot on occult knowledge. But if you don't know my face, my name's Denise and I'm an astrologer. I make content here and on puroastrology.com to help people get to know themselves better using astrology. I also make a bunch of videos about relationships, and that's really my interest with astrology. So if that sounds interesting to you, you might consider subscribing. So yesterday I was doing some reading and I came across the story of Genesis. I'm sure you guys have heard the story of Adam and Eve and the snake. And for whatever reason, I mean, I've read that story before. I know it since I was a kid, but for some reason yesterday when I read it, it like hit different. And it really made me think about Scorpio and the Scorpio symbolism. Scorpio is associated with the symbol of the snake. It is also associated with the scorpion and the phoenix. So it's supposed to have like different parts of its evolution. But one of the things that it is associated with is the snake. So when I was reading the story of Adam and Eve again, as I was yesterday, I was like, this really reminds me of Scorpio. According to Genesis, Adam and Eve were, you know, in the garden, and they essentially were totally innocent and pure, and they were naked. They really felt no sort of way because they didn't know that they should be embarrassed or ashamed of their naked bodies, right? And then here comes the snake, and the snake is just like, hey, you know, I know God said you could eat from all of these other trees, but like there's this real good tree over here that you might be interested in. And Adam and Eve at first are just like, nah, like we're good. Like we have all this other stuff going on. And the snake is like, no. You're really gonna wanna know what's going on over here with this tree. Like, trust me, this tree has the good stuff. So that snake essentially is inviting them to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I'm just like, boy, does that remind me of Scorpio. So essentially Scorpios, they already have that knowledge. From a very young age, Scorpios are essentially tuned in to this like hidden knowledge of essentially evil in the world. Yes, they know what's good, but they also know what's evil in a way that other people don't know. And the way that I could best explain this to you as to why this is, it's kind of like, you know how some people have an eye for beauty or an eye for design, or some people are just really good at art and decorating, things like that. Libras, you know how Libras have an eye for design or for putting an outfit together, or how some people are just really good at doing hair, things like that. It just comes to them. Well, that's essentially what happens with Scorpios. Scorpios are essentially tuned into this vibe. And I was like, why is it that like the snake, right? It brings the knowledge of good and evil. Scorpio is associated with the snake. And then I also remembered one time this astrologer that I was taking a course from. It's the only place that I've heard of this mentioned, and I couldn't actually find it in any book, but it did make sense to me. She said that Scorpio is associated with DNA, and it just like made the record skip for me because I was just like, I've never heard that before. And I didn't really ask her like, where is this coming from? Because I didn't want to be rude. Like she was going on about other things. And then I started thinking about DNA. And DNA, in case you don't know what it looks like, DNA looks like two coiled up snakes, and the snakes bring me back to Scorpio. And Scorpio, the only thing that I can find that, you know, in the literature, in the astrology literature, which we do have, in my reference book that I always talk about, Rex Bills, that I always use to make sure that I'm not just talking out of my ass, that I'm actually using some textual evidence. This one mentions that Scorpio and the 8th house are associated with legacy, you know, like an inheritance that you're left by people in your family. Because remember that the 8th house represents other people's money, other people's resources, and how those resources can benefit you. But let me put that down. But we also have to think about where on the chart Scorpio is located. So this is going to get a little bit deeper into the astrological symbolism, but bear with me here. So if you pop up the chart. I'm going to pop up a chart so you can see where Scorpio is located. This top of the chart represents society. It represents the things that people know about us just from hearing our family name, for example. Or, you know, they see our house and they're just like, oh, I know stuff about that person's family. That is the way that society essentially judges you. That's where Scorpio is located. It's in the top of the chart, but it's also on the right-hand side of the chart. So this right-hand side of the chart represents relationships. So it's kind of like the relationships and the history, the legacy that was left behind to us from our ancestors, from our family, and the way that the public perceives it. So I know that that sounds a little bit confusing and convoluted, but bear with me for a second. So what I really think is that people who have strong Scorpio, so when Scorpio, it's not just your sun sign, when you have several planets in Scorpio, or you have one planet in Scorpio and then you have Pluto connecting with another one of your important planets, or maybe you have some planets in the 8th house. So you have to have some repetition to really feel this very strongly. So if you have any of this going on, any of this strong Scorpio energy, then you are tuned into this, because I feel like it's in your DNA. It's coiled up all up inside you. Maybe you did not witness it yourself. Maybe you didn't experience abuse through your own flesh and blood, but the people in your family sure did. Remember that the 8th house also represents secrets and taboos. So oftentimes, especially in the past, especially with older generations, whenever something like unsavory happened in the family, what would they do? They would hide it. They would keep it away. And so even if you didn't know, even if you weren't around when that happened, when that abuse took place, the people in your family were the older people, right? And it's through your DNA that essentially it's held within you. And that is why you are kind of tuned into that frequency. And you're the first person to be like, that guy's a creep. That woman, she's up to no good, right? Because men and women can be creepy, not just men. So you are tuned into this information in a way that other people are not. So, okay, now I'm gonna tell you a story that I want you to tell me. If you're a Scorpio, tell me if you think I'm right. If you're not a Scorpio and you're watching this, tell me what you think about this story. So a few days ago, I was doing some research on Ashtanga yoga because I've been practicing a lot. This is like not for show. That's where I do it. I've been doing it every day and I've been very sore. So I was looking for some like tips on like, hey bro, like why am I so sore? So I found somebody's blog who was talking about his Ashtanga practice. And essentially in one of his blog posts, he talked about his visit to Mysore, India, which is where Ashtanga was created, I believe. And so he tells you all about his experience there and how he went to a school there, and he showed you, you know, the room he stayed at, and he talked about the locals and the restaurants and how it was so wonderful. But he had like an incident that made him uncomfortable. So let me tell you the incident as he recalls it. And I just want you to know, this is a man who's, you know, in his 40s. He's in his 40s, and I want you to think back to Adam and Eve, who had no knowledge of good and evil. And it really reminded me of this man. I was like, how can you get to be 40 years old and you still don't know about good and evil? But okay. So he says that he was leaving one of his restaurants that he really liked in Mysore, and that this teenager comes up to him and he's just like, hey, you have a sexy mustache. And he was like, wow, that's a weird thing to say, but like maybe, you know, it got lost in translation and maybe he's just trying to be nice. So I was like, oh, thanks, you know, yeah, thanks. And then the teenager goes further and he's just like, hey, so like, are you married? And the guy's like, well, no, I'm not married. And the teenager continues and he's just like, do you like boys or girls? And he was just like, well, that's a weird question. He was like, that's a weird question, but maybe he thinks that because I'm not married, maybe he thinks I'm gay. So I told him, I was like, no, I like girls. So the teenager continues further and is just like, hey, so like, can I touch your eggplant? And the guy's like, whoa, like where is this coming from? Like, no, you can't touch my eggplant. And the teenager goes further and is just like, hey, but it's because a few days ago John let me touch his eggplant and I really want to touch your eggplant. Can I please touch it? And the guy's like, no, I'm good. Like, no, I don't want that. Please leave me alone. And he takes off. And the guy, the grown man who's writing this blog article, he just closes off by saying, yeah, that was like a really weird encounter. And I really feel like I understand now what women go through when they're catcalled and harassed on the street. I felt so skeeved out and grossed out. And I was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe people could just act like that. And I read that like encounter, and I was just like, are you guys not following what I'm following? Like, I think maybe this is just me being a crazy Scorpio. Tell me if I'm being paranoid. But I think what happened there was that that teenager is a sex worker. And me being the Scorpio that I am, I'm pretty much presuming that he doesn't run himself. I'm sure somebody is sending him out there to look for tourists who might be there for sex tourism. And I think that's essentially what happened. And I thought it was so naive of that grown man to not understand what was happening and not understand what was going on. And I think that that's a perfect example of how some people are not tuned in to the Scorpio energy, to the Pluto energy, to the 8th house energy. And because it's probably because they don't have it in their chart and they've just never seen maybe poverty to that level, or they've never seen exploitation to that level. But when you have Pluto and Scorpio and the 8th house strong in your chart, you're very much aware that things are not what they seem. And so that's what I want to leave you off on. Please let me know in the comments, am I a total Looney Tune for thinking that? Like, was he right? Was that little kid, like freaking teenager, just harassing this 40-year-old man? I mean, I don't doubt that that could happen, but I think it would be way more difficult for me to believe that rather than believing that that was probably a child that was being exploited for sex work. Tell me if I'm crazy in the comments. But if you're liking this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up so that I can, you know, just like get encouraged to make more videos. I am trying to put out videos every single week again, as I used to do back in the day, back when my hair wasn't this curly. So that's the video. I hope you liked it. If you did, make sure you give me a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, subscribe to my channel. I put out videos every single week, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.